The silver teaspoon caught the morning light streaming through the hotel dining room window, and as Adelaide Lancaster held it up to inspect her work, she saw not her own reflection, but the endless stretch of days that had brought her to Fort Worth, Texas, in the spring of 1882. She had been polishing silver at the Grand Western Hotel for 3 months now, her fingers perpetually stained with tarnish remover, her back aching from bending over the long wooden table where she worked each morning before the breakfast service began. The hotel was the finest establishment in Fort Worth, catering to cattle barons and businessmen who came through the growing city with money in their pockets and expectations in their eyes. Adelaide had learned quickly that expectations were dangerous things in a place like this. She set the spoon down among its fellows, each one gleaming like captured moonlight, and reached for another from the tarnished pile. Her mother would have been horrified to see her working like this, hands roughened by labor, her simple calico dress so far removed from the silk gowns she had once worn in Philadelphia. But her mother had been dead for 2 years now, and her father had followed 6 months later, leaving Adelaide with nothing but debts and the bitter knowledge that the life she had known was as tarnished as the forks and knives before her. The sound of boots on hardwood made her look up. A man stood in the doorway of the dining room, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin that spoke of days spent under the relentless Texas sky. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he wore a gun belt low on his hips in that casual way that suggested he knew how to use what it carried. His eyes were an unexpected shade of gray, like storm clouds gathering over the prairie, and they fixed on Adelaide with an intensity that made her breath catch. Hotel not serving breakfast yet. His voice was rough, like gravel tumbling in a creek bed, but not unkind. "Not for another hour, sir," Adelaide replied, keeping her tone professional. She had learned that lesson early in her employment. Friendliness was too easily mistaken for invitation. "But if you are a guest, I can arrange for coffee to be brought to your room." He stepped into the room, moving with a measured grace that reminded her of the ranch horses she had seen in the corrals outside town. "I am not a guest yet. Rode in about 20 minutes ago. My horse is being seen to at the livery, and I was told this was the place to stay if a man wanted a decent bed and a hot meal." "It is," Adelaide confirmed. She set down the cloth she had been using and stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "The front desk is through that door and to your left. Mr. Henderson will see you registered." The man did not move toward the indicated door. Instead, he walked closer to the table where Adelaide had been working, his gaze dropping to the rows of gleaming silver. "That is fine work. Takes patience to get a shine like that. Thank you." Adelaide was not sure what else to say. Guests rarely noticed her work, and when they did, they certainly did not comment on it. "Name is Mitch Garrett," he said, looking back at her. "Most folks call me Mitch." She hesitated, then decided there was no harm in common courtesy. "Adelaide Lancaster. Most folks call me Adelaide." A slow smile crossed his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something more dangerous. "Adelaide, that is a pretty name. Suits you better than what most folks probably call you around here." "And what would that be?" "The girl who polishes silver. The maid. The help." He said it without cruelty, simply stating facts. People do not often see past what you do to who you are. Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks, though she could not have said whether it was from anger or something else entirely. "I should let you get registered, Mr. Garrett. As I said, breakfast will not be served for another hour." "Mitch," he corrected. "And I will go see about that room, but I expect I will be seeing more of you, Adelaide Lancaster." He left then, his boots making that same steady sound against the floor, and Adelaide stood alone among her silver, her heart beating faster than it should have been. She told herself it meant nothing, that cowboys drifted through Fort Worth every day, staying a night or two before moving on to wherever the work or the wandering took them. Mitch Garrett would be no different. But when he came down for breakfast an hour later, clean-shaven and wearing fresh clothes that still carried the scent of trail dust, he chose a table by the window where she was refilling water glasses, and when their eyes met, she knew she had been lying to herself. The day proceeded as days at the Grand Western Hotel always did. Adelaide finished with the silver and moved on to her other duties, which included helping in the kitchen when the cook needed an extra pair of hands, changing linens in the guest rooms, and generally making herself useful wherever Mr. Henderson, the hotel manager, decided she was needed. It was exhausting work, but Adelaide was grateful for it. When she had first arrived in Fort Worth with barely enough money for a week at the boarding house, she had not been certain she would survive. The hotel job had been a lifeline, even if it meant 12-hour days and wages that left little for anything beyond basic necessities. She was carrying a stack of clean towels up the back stairs when she encountered Mitch again. He was coming down, moving aside to let her pass on the narrow stairwell. "Afternoon," he said. "Good afternoon." Adelaide kept her eyes down, focused on not dropping the towels. "You work every hour God sends, do you?" That made her look up. "Most of them, yes. A person has to earn her keep." "Nobody is questioning your work ethic." He paused, and when she glanced at him, she saw something in his expression she could not quite read. "It is just a lot for one person, seems like." "The hotel has other staff," Adelaide said a bit defensively. "I am not doing all of it alone." "I did not mean to offend you." Mitch shifted his weight, and in the close confines of the stairwell, Adelaide became acutely aware of his size, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his presence seemed to fill the space. "Just making an observation." "You seem like someone who deserves better than this. Better than honest work." Adelaide felt her temper spark. "I assure you, Mr. Garrett, I am perfectly content with my situation." "That is not what I meant either." He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I am making a mess of this. What I am trying to say is that you seem educated, well-spoken, like maybe you came from something different before you ended up here polishing silver and hauling towels." Adelaide's grip tightened on the linens. "My past is none of your concern. You are right. I apologize." Mitch pressed himself against the wall to give her room to pass. "I will let you get back to your work." She moved past him, hyper-aware of the inches between them, and continued up the stairs without looking back. But she could feel his gaze on her, and it stayed with her long after she heard his boots descending toward the ground floor. That evening, after the dinner service was finished and the dining room cleaned, Adelaide finally had a few hours to herself. She returned to the small room she rented in a boarding house 3 streets over from the hotel, a cramped space that held little more than a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing everything she owned. It was nothing like the spacious bedroom she had known in Philadelphia, with its canopy bed and velvet curtains, but it was hers, paid for with her own labor, and there was a certain pride in that. She washed the day's grime from her face and hands, changed into her nightgown, and sat on the bed with the book she had been reading, a battered copy of poetry she had found at the general store. But the words swam before her eyes, and instead of seeing verses on the page, she kept seeing Mitch Garrett's storm-cloud eyes and that slow smile that had made her stomach flip. This was foolishness, she told herself firmly. She had no time for romantic notions, and even if she did, a drifting cowboy was the last person she should fix her attention on. Men like that did not stay. They blew through towns like tumbleweeds, leaving broken hearts in their wake. But when she closed her eyes that night, it was his face she saw in the darkness. The next morning, Mitch was in the dining room again for breakfast, and this time when Adelaide brought his coffee, he spoke to her with an easiness that suggested he had decided to ignore the awkwardness of their stairwell conversation. "What does a person do for entertainment in Fort Worth?" he asked as she filled his cup. "That depends on what sort of entertainment you are seeking," Adelaide replied carefully. "There are saloons, if that is your preference, a theater that occasionally has traveling shows, church socials on Sunday evenings. What do you do?" The question caught her off guard. "I beg your pardon, for entertainment. When you are not working yourself to exhaustion at this hotel." Adelaide glanced around, but none of the other guests seemed to be paying them any attention. "I read mostly. Walk along the Trinity River when the weather is pleasant. Nothing very exciting, I am afraid." "Reading is not dull," Mitch said. "What do you read?" "Poetry. Novels when I can afford them. Newspapers, though the news is usually weeks old by the time it reaches Fort Worth." "You miss the city." It was not a question, and Adelaide found herself answering honestly. "Sometimes, but cities have their own problems. At least here the air is clean and the sky is big enough to breathe under." "That is the truth." Mitch leaned back in his chair, studying her with those gray eyes. "I have been to Philadelphia. Spent a winter there once. Too many people pressed too close together for my liking, though I will grant the buildings are impressive." "You have traveled extensively then." "Extensively might be overstating it, but yes, I have moved around a fair bit. Cattle drives when I was younger took me up to Kansas and Colorado. Ranch work in Wyoming. Spent some time in California, though that did not take. Too many people with too many schemes to get rich quick." He paused. "But I keep coming back to Texas. Something about this land gets into your bones." "And what brings you to Fort Worth now?" Adelaide asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too much like genuine interest rather than polite conversation, but Mitch did not seem to mind. "Looking for work, if I am honest. Heard there might be a position at one of the big ranches outside town. Figured I would ask around, see what is available, and if nothing comes of it, well, I will move on. That is the way of things." "That must be a lonely way to live," Adelaide said before she could stop herself. Something flickered in Mitch's expression, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "It can be. But a man gets used to it, learns not to put down roots too deep, not to expect more than what each day brings." "That sounds terribly sad, maybe, or maybe it is just realistic." He picked up his coffee cup, took a long drink. "But I will tell you something, Adelaide Lancaster. Since riding into Fort Worth yesterday, I have been thinking maybe it would not be so bad to stay in one place for a while, if I had a reason to." The weight of his gaze made Adelaide's pulse quicken. She should have walked away then, should have remembered her place and the professional distance she needed to maintain. But instead, she found herself saying, "I hope you find your reason, Mr. Garrett." "Mitch," he said again, that smile returning, "and I think I might already be looking at it." Before Adelaide could respond to that extraordinary statement, Mr. Henderson appeared in the dining room doorway, his sharp eyes taking in the scene with obvious disapproval. Adelaide quickly excused herself and hurried back to the kitchen, her face burning. She spent the rest of the morning trying not to think about Mitchell Garrett and failing miserably. His words circled in her mind like hawks riding thermals. "I think I might already be looking at it." What did that mean? Was he truly suggesting interest in her? Or was she reading too much into casual conversation? By midday, she had convinced herself it was the latter. Men said things they did not mean all the time, especially to women they perceived as being beneath their station. That Mitch seemed kind did not mean his intentions were serious. He would finish his business in Fort Worth and ride out, and she would never see him again. It was better not to let her imagination run wild. But then afternoon came, and with it a small package left at the front desk addressed to her. Mr. Henderson handed it over with a disapproving sniff. "See that this does not become a habit, Miss Lancaster. The Grand Western is a respectable establishment." Adelaide took the package to a quiet corner and unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a slim volume of poetry, newer than the one she owned, with a ribbon marking a particular page. She opened to it and found a poem about silver moonlight and prairie nights, and tucked into the spine was a note in strong, slanted handwriting. "Saw this at the bookstore and thought of you. I know you like poetry, and this reminded me of Texas. If you have time this evening after your work is done, I will be taking a walk along the river around sunset. You would be welcome to join me if you are so inclined. No expectations, just conversation. Mitch." Adelaide read the note 3 times, her heart hammering. This was dangerous territory. She knew that with the certainty of someone who had already lost everything once. Getting involved with a man like Mitch, even in friendship, was inviting disaster. He would leave, and she would be left nursing a wounded heart while still having to polish silver and carry towels up narrow staircases. But when her work finally ended that evening, and she found herself walking toward the Trinity River as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she knew she was already too far gone to turn back now. She found him standing by the water's edge, skipping stones across the sluggish current. He turned when he heard her approach, and the smile that lit his face made all her careful reservations crumble like old paper. "You came," he said simply. "I did." Adelaide held up the book. "Thank you for this. You should not have spent your money on me. I wanted to." Mitch walked toward her, closing the distance until they stood a few feet apart. The lowering sun turned everything golden, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. "Did you read the poem?" "I did. It is beautiful. Reminded me of last night. How the moonlight looked on all that silver you had polished." He paused, then added, "How it looked on you too, if I am being honest." Adelaide felt her breath catch. "Mr. Garrett, I do not think, Mitch, please, just Mitch." He stepped closer, and she could see the earnestness in his eyes. "Adelaide, I know we have only just met. I know you have every reason to be cautious, especially with someone like me who has been drifting for years without much to show for it. But I need you to know something. From the moment I saw you in that dining room yesterday morning, bent over your work, concentrating so hard on getting those spoons to shine, I felt something shift inside me. Like I had been walking a long time in the dark and suddenly saw a light worth moving toward." "That is quite a thing to say to someone you barely know," Adelaide managed, though her voice sounded unsteady even to her own ears. "I know. And if you tell me I am out of line, I will apologize and leave you be. But before you do that, let me ask you something. Do you feel it too? This connection, this pull, or am I making a complete fool of myself?" Adelaide could have lied, should have lied probably. But standing there by the river with the Texas sky stretching endless above them, she found she could not. "I feel it," she whispered. The transformation in Mitch's expression was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "Thank God for that. I was half convinced I was losing my mind." "We might both be losing our minds," Adelaide said, but she was smiling now, unable to help herself. "This is not sensible." "No," Mitch agreed, "but some of the best things in life are not sensible. They just are." They walked along the river as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Mitch told her about his childhood on a small ranch in southern Texas, how his parents had died when he was 16, and he had been on his own ever since. Adelaide told him about Philadelphia, about the life she had lost, and the grief that had brought her west. She told him things she had not told anyone in Fort Worth, truths she had kept locked away because there had been no one who seemed interested in hearing them. "Do you regret coming here?" Mitch asked as they paused to watch the last light drain from the sky. Adelaide considered the question. "No. I thought I would, but I do not. Philadelphia was beautiful, but it was also suffocating in its own way. All those expectations about who I should be, what I should want. Here, I can at least be myself, even if that self is someone who polishes silver for a living." "There is no shame in honest work," Mitch said firmly. "And for what it is worth, I think you are remarkable, not in spite of everything you have been through, but because of it. You could have given up. Gone back east, found some family to take you in even if it meant being dependent on their charity. But you did not. You came out here and made your own way. That takes courage, or stubbornness. Maybe both." Mitch turned to face her fully, and in the gathering darkness, his eyes were serious. "Adelaide, I want to be honest with you about something. I came to Fort Worth looking for ranch work, and I found a position today. Foreman at the Circle K Ranch, about 10 miles outside town. It is good pay, stable work, the kind of thing I have not had in years." Adelaide felt her stomach sink. "That is wonderful news." She tried to inject enthusiasm into her voice and knew she failed. "The thing is," Mitch continued, "I accepted the position because I have been drifting too long and I am tired of it. But I also accepted it because you are here in Fort Worth, and the thought of riding away from you after just meeting you felt wrong in a way I cannot quite explain. Mitch, you cannot make life decisions based on someone you barely know. Why not? People make decisions based on worse reasons all the time. Fear, desperation, what other folks think they should do." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused but warm, and his touch sent electricity up her arm. "I am not saying I expect anything from you, Adelaide. I am just saying that I want to see where this goes, if you are willing to give it a chance." Adelaide knew she should be sensible. She should protect herself, maintain her distance, not let this man with his storm cloud eyes and rough edges get any closer than he already had. But standing there in the darkness with her hand in his, she found that sensibility held less appeal than the wild, terrifying hope blooming in her chest. "I think I would like that," she said softly. Mitch's answering smile was worth every risk. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing connection. Mitch started his work at the Circle K Ranch, which meant early mornings and long days. But he came into town whenever he could, and Adelaide arranged her schedule at the hotel to maximize the time they could spend together. They took walks along the river, shared meals at a small cafe that asked no questions about a working woman dining with a ranch foreman, and talked until the stars wheeled overhead. Adelaide learned that Mitch could gentle a nervous horse with patience and soft words, that he read philosophy books in what little spare time he had, and that, beneath his rough exterior, was a thoughtful man who paid attention to the world around him with uncommon care. Mitch learned that Adelaide played piano, though she had not touched an instrument since leaving Philadelphia, that she wanted to one day have a home of her own with a garden, and that she had a quick wit that could make him laugh even after the hardest days. But it was not all easy. Mr. Henderson made increasingly pointed comments about Adelaide's behavior, suggesting that she was forgetting her place and drawing unwelcome attention to the hotel. Some of the other staff began treating her differently, the women with jealousy and the men with a presumption that made her skin crawl. "Maybe we should be more careful," Adelaide said one evening as they sat by the river. "People are talking." "Let them talk," Mitch said, but there was frustration in his voice. "Though I hate that it is making things difficult for you at the hotel, it is not your fault. Is it not? If I had kept my distance, you would not be dealing with any of this." Adelaide turned to look at him, this man who had somehow become essential to her in such a short time. "Do you regret it? Being with me?" "God, no." Mitch pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "That is not what I am saying at all. I just wish I could give you more than stolen moments and the risk of losing your position." "What are you saying, Mitch?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Adelaide Lancaster. I am saying that these past few weeks with you have meant more to me than the previous 10 years of my life combined. And I am saying that I want more than this, more than secret meetings and worrying about what small-minded people think." Adelaide's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What do you want?" Mitch turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to marry me. I want you to come out to the ranch where I can get us a little house once I have saved enough. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build a life with you, Adelaide. A real life, not this half-existence we are managing now. Mitch, we have only known each other a few weeks. I know. And if you need more time, I will give it to you. I will wait as long as you need. But I also know my own heart, and it is yours if you want it." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. Everything he was offering was everything she had thought lost to her, all the dreams she had packed away when she left Philadelphia. A home, a future, someone to build that future with. But beneath the joy was fear, the memory of how quickly life could take everything away. "I am scared," she admitted. "So am I," Mitch said. "Terrified, if I am honest. But I think the best things in life come with fear attached because they matter so much. And you matter to me, Adelaide, more than anything." She thought about the silver she polished each morning, how the tarnish came away under persistent care to reveal the shine beneath. She thought about how Mitch had looked at her from the first moment, not seeing a maid or a fallen society woman, but simply her, Adelaide, whole and valuable and worth choosing. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it." The tears spilled over now, but she was smiling through them. "I love you too, Mitch. I think I have since that first morning when you noticed my work, when you saw me instead of just the girl who polishes silver." Mitch let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. They held each other as the river flowed past, and the stars emerged overhead. Two people who had been drifting finding anchor in each other. They were married 3 days later at the small church on the edge of Fort Worth, with the minister and his wife as witnesses. Adelaide wore a simple dress of pale blue that she had sewn herself, and Mitch wore his cleanest clothes and a nervous smile. It was nothing like the society wedding she might have had in Philadelphia, with hundreds of guests and an elaborate reception. But standing before the minister and promising her life to this man she had known for less than a month, Adelaide felt a certainty she had never known before. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Mitch kissed her with gentle reverence, Adelaide understood that sometimes the best things came not from careful planning, but from taking a leap of faith when the moment demanded it. The weeks that followed their wedding were an adjustment for both of them. Mitch arranged for Adelaide to leave her position at the Grand Western Hotel, which Mr. Henderson accepted with barely concealed relief and pointed comments about propriety that Adelaide ignored. She moved into Mitch's small room at the ranch bunkhouse, a temporary arrangement until they could afford their own place, and learned what it meant to be the wife of a working cowboy. The ranch was vast, stretching across thousands of acres of prairie grassland, and the work was relentless. Mitch left before dawn and often did not return until after dark, exhausted and sore from long hours in the saddle. Adelaide found work helping the ranch owner's wife, Mrs. Catherine Montgomery, with household tasks and cooking for the ranch hands. It was different from hotel work, more personal and in some ways more demanding, but Catherine was kind and the Cowboys respectful once they understood that Adelaide was Mitch's wife and therefore under his protection. But the long hours apart wore on them both. Adelaide found herself watching the horizon each evening, waiting for the sight of Mitch riding in with the other hands. And when he finally came through the door, dust-covered and weary, the joy in his eyes when he saw her waiting made every minute of separation worthwhile. "How was your day?" she would ask, helping him wash up before supper. "Long. Brought in a couple dozen strays from the east pasture, mended about a mile of fence line, helped one of the young hands who took a fall and nearly broke his fool neck." Mitch would lean into her touch as she wiped dust from his face. "But I thought about you the whole time. That is what kept me going." "I thought about you too," Adelaide would admit. "Worried mostly. Ranch work seems terribly dangerous. No more dangerous than anything else. Less than some things." He would pull her close then, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I am careful, Adelaide. I promise. I have something precious to come home to now. I am not taking unnecessary risks." They settled into a rhythm, learning each other through the dailiness of married life. Adelaide discovered that Mitch sang off-key when he was happy, that he had a deep fear of snakes that he would never admit to the other ranch hands, and that he slept with one arm always reaching for her, even in sleep, needing the assurance that she was there. Mitch learned that Adelaide talked in her sleep sometimes, murmuring fragments of poetry, that she could turn even the plainest ingredients into something delicious, and that she had nightmares about losing everything again that only subsided when he held her and promised he was not going anywhere. 3 months after their marriage, Mitch came home with news that made Adelaide's heart soar. The ranch owner, Mr. Montgomery, had been so pleased with Mitch's work that he was offering them a small house on the edge of the ranch property, rent-free as part of Mitch's compensation package. "It is not much," Mitch said, unable to contain his excitement despite the disclaimer. 2 rooms need some fixing up, but it is ours, Adelaide, our own place." They moved in the following week, and Adelaide threw herself into making the little house a home. She sewed curtains from fabric purchased at the general store in Fort Worth, scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, and planted a small garden in the patch of dirt behind the house. Mitch repaired the leaking roof, built shelves for Adelaide's small collection of books, and constructed a bench for the front porch where they could sit together in the evenings and watch the sun set over the prairie. It was during one of those evening sits, about 4 months into their marriage, that Adelaide told Mitch she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be certain before saying anything. But as she sat beside her husband, his arm around her shoulders, watching the sky turn from gold to crimson to purple, she could not keep the news to herself any longer. "Mitch, I have something to tell you." He looked down at her, concern immediately crossing his features. "What is wrong?" "Are you all right?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderful, actually." Adelaide took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, sometime in the spring, I think." For a moment, Mitch simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face crumpled and Adelaide realized with shock that he was crying, tears streaming down his sun-weathered cheeks. "Mitch, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." His voice was choked, barely above a whisper. "Everything is so right it terrifies me. Adelaide, I never thought I would have this. A wife who loves me, a home, a child on the way. It is more than I ever imagined possible." "You deserve it," Adelaide said firmly, her own eyes filling with tears. "You deserve all of this and more." "I do not know about that," Mitch said. "But I am going to spend every day trying to be worthy of it. Worthy of you and this child we are bringing into the world." He kissed her then, tender and reverent, and Adelaide felt a completeness she had not known was possible. This man, this rough-edged cowboy who had walked into the Grand Western Hotel dining room 8 months ago, had given her back not just a life but a future bright with promise. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Adelaide found the Texas heat in the summer months nearly unbearable. She continued helping Mrs. Montgomery, though Catherine insisted she take on lighter duties as her belly grew. Mitch became almost absurdly protective, worrying over every twinge Adelaide felt and reading every pamphlet about childbirth he could get his hands on. "You are going to worry yourself into an early grave," Adelaide teased one evening as Mitch fretted over whether she should be lifting even a cooking pot. "I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe," Mitch said. "Is that so wrong?" "It is sweet," Adelaide said, "but also a bit excessive." "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Mitch. I will be fine." "I know. But you are not just any woman. You are my woman, and that is different." Adelaide could not argue with that logic, especially when it came wrapped in such obvious love. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, Adelaide's belly grew round and heavy. She felt the baby move for the first time in late October, a flutter like butterfly wings against her ribs that made her gasp with wonder. When she told Mitch, he spent an hour with his hand on her stomach, waiting patiently until he felt the movement too, and the look on his face when it happened was something Adelaide knew she would remember for the rest of her life. They spent the winter months preparing for the baby's arrival. Mitch built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving their initials along with the baby's expected birth month into the headboard. Adelaide sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her fingers flying over the needle as she imagined the small person who would soon wear them. Catherine Montgomery, who had 3 grown children of her own, shared advice and stories that made the approaching reality seem less daunting. "The first one is always the hardest," Catherine said one afternoon as they sat together mending clothes. "Not just the birth, though that is difficult enough, but everything after. You do not know what you are doing, and the baby certainly does not, so you are both just figuring it out as you go. But you will manage, Adelaide. You have a strong husband who loves you, and that is worth more than all the preparation in the world." Adelaide thought about those words often as winter gave way to early spring and her due date approached. She and Mitch were young, neither of them yet 25, and they were navigating a life neither had fully planned for. But they had each other, and that, Adelaide was learning, was the foundation everything else could be built upon. The baby came on a warm April evening, arriving with a speed that caught everyone off guard. Adelaide had felt the first pains just after lunch, but had assumed they were the false contractions Catherine had warned her about. By dinner time, however, there was no mistaking what was happening. Mitch rode like a demon to fetch the midwife from Fort Worth, a capable woman named Mrs. Sarah Jenkins, who had delivered half the babies in the county. She arrived to find Adelaide in active labor, pacing the small house with Catherine Montgomery supporting her through the contractions. "Well, this one is not wasting any time," Mrs. Jenkins said approvingly as she assessed the situation. "Mr. Garrett, I will need you to boil water and fetch clean linens, and try not to panic. Your wife is doing exactly what she needs to do." But Mitch did panic, at least a little. Adelaide could see it in his eyes, the fear that something might go wrong, that he might lose her just when they were building this life together. Between contractions, she reached for his hand. "I am all right," she told him. "I am strong, and so is our baby. You said I was brave, remember. Trust that I can do this." "I do trust you," Mitch said, squeezing her fingers. "I trust you with everything." The labor was hard but mercifully short. Just after midnight, as a spring storm rolled across the prairie with thunder and lightning, Adelaide delivered a healthy baby boy with strong lungs and a determined grip. Mrs. Jenkins cleaned him up and placed him in Adelaide's arms, and Adelaide looked down at her son with overwhelming love and wonder. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He really is," Mitch said from beside the bed, his voice full of awe. He reached out tentatively to touch the baby's tiny hand, and when the infant's fingers closed around his, Mitch made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I am going to do my very best to deserve you." They named him Matthew, after Mitch's father, with the middle name Lawrence after Adelaide's father. Matthew Lawrence Garrett, born in a small ranch house during a thunderstorm, with two young parents who had barely known each other a year ago, but who loved each other with a fierceness that would shape his entire life. The first months of Matthew's life were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Adelaide learned the particular rhythm of infant care, the constant cycle of feeding and changing and soothing. Mitch helped when he could, though his ranch work kept him busy. He would come home each evening and take Matthew from Adelaide, walking the floor with his son so Adelaide could rest, talking to the baby about the horses and the cattle and the big sky that stretched over their heads. "He cannot understand you," Adelaide said one evening, watching from the bed as Mitch paced with Matthew against his shoulder. "Maybe not, but he will someday, and I want him to know my voice, to know that I am here and I am not going anywhere." Mitch looked down at the baby, his expression tender. "I want him to grow up knowing he is loved and wanted, that he has a father who chose to stay." Adelaide understood then the depth of what Mitch was doing. He was giving Matthew what he had lost when his own parents died, that sense of security and belonging. It made her love him even more, if such a thing was possible. As Matthew grew from a tiny infant into a more substantial baby with a personality all his own, Adelaide and Mitch grew too, not just as parents but as partners. They learned to communicate in the shorthand of long married couples, to share the load of daily life with practiced ease. The rough edges Mitch had carried when Adelaide first met him smoothed out, not disappearing entirely but gentling into something softer, more grounded. One evening, when Matthew was 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Adelaide was washing dishes when Mitch came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You remember that first morning when I walked into the hotel dining room and saw you polishing silver?" he asked. "Of course I do. You were covered in trail dust and looking for a room." "I was looking for more than a room, though I did not know it then." Mitch rested his chin on her shoulder. "I was looking for a reason to stop running, to put down roots and build something real. And there you were, making tarnished spoons shine, and I knew." "You knew after seeing me for 30 seconds?" Adelaide asked, amused. "Well, maybe not in detail, but I knew there was something about you, something I needed to pay attention to." He paused, then added quietly, "You made me want to be better, Adelaide, to be the kind of man who could deserve a life like this. A wife who loves him, a son to raise, a home to come to every evening." Adelaide turned in his arms to face him. "You did not need to become better, Mitch. You were already good, you just needed someone to see it." "Then I am glad that someone was you," he kissed her softly. "I love you, Adelaide Garrett, more than I did the day I married you, which I would not have thought possible. I love you too, more than words can say." They stood there in their small kitchen, holding each other while their son slept nearby, and the Texas night pressed dark against the windows. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something precious from that unlikely meeting. The seasons turned. Matthew began walking at 11 months, stumbling around the house on unsteady legs while Adelaide followed behind, ready to catch him when he fell. Mitch taught him to love horses, taking the boy to the stables and letting him pet the gentle mares, telling him stories about the great cattle drives and the wild prairie that had been his childhood. Adelaide started a small business making dresses for the women in Fort Worth and the surrounding ranches. Word spread that she was skilled with a needle and had an eye for style, and soon she had more work than she could manage. The extra money allowed them to buy a few luxuries: a new stove for the kitchen, a rug for the floor, books for Adelaide's growing collection. When Matthew was 2 years old, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more joy, the confidence of experience tempering the uncertainty. Mitch was still protective but less frantic, trusting now in Adelaide's strength and his own ability to support her. Their daughter, Anne-Marie, arrived in the early spring, a calm baby who seemed content to observe the world with wide eyes remarkably similar to her mother's. Matthew was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything and sometimes needing to be gently discouraged from excessive enthusiasm. "Soft touches, Matthew," Adelaide would remind him as he patted his sister's head. "She is very small and fragile." "I am gentle," Matthew would insist with the confidence of a 2-year-old who had not yet fully mastered his own limbs. But he was trying, and that, Adelaide thought, was what mattered. They were all trying, learning together how to be a family, making mistakes and finding grace in the process. 2 years later, another son arrived, Joseph Mitchell, named for both of his grandfathers. He was a robust baby with a will to match, and from his first days it was clear he would be a force to be reckoned with. Adelaide sometimes wondered how she had gone from polishing silver at a hotel to managing a household of 5. But then she would look at Mitch across the dinner table, their 3 children between them, and know exactly how it had happened. One choice at a time, one leap of faith after another, until this life that once seemed impossible had become her daily reality. The ranch prospered, and with it, their fortunes. Mr. Montgomery, getting older and without children interested in continuing the ranch, began talking about eventually selling to Mitch, offering terms that would allow them to take over the operation gradually. It was a huge opportunity, one that would require years of hard work and sacrifice, but it was also a chance to build something lasting for their children. "What do you think?" Mitch asked Adelaide one evening after the children were in bed and they were discussing the possibility. "It is a big commitment, bigger than anything we have taken on before, and there is risk involved. If the cattle market turns or we have a bad drought, we could lose everything." "We have already lost everything once," Adelaide said, "both of us, and we survived it." "We can survive anything as long as we are together." Mitch smiled, that slow, devastating smile that still made her heart skip. "Then we are doing this. We are doing this." They shook hands with Mr. Montgomery the next week, beginning the long process of transitioning ownership. It would take 5 years of payments, of proving they could manage the ranch successfully, but it was a start. A future they were building together, brick by brick, choice by choice. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources and their faith. There was a bout of illness that swept through the ranch when Anne-Marie was 4, leaving them all weak and shaken. There were arguments about money and decisions, the friction that came from 2 strong-willed people trying to navigate life together. But through it all, the foundation they had built that first evening by the Trinity River held firm. Adelaide still thought sometimes about that girl who had polished silver at the Grand Western Hotel, who had been alone and uncertain about her future. She felt compassion for that girl, but also a kind of distant wonder. That person seemed like someone from another life, someone she had been before becoming Adelaide Garrett, wife and mother and co-owner of a growing ranch. But she also remembered the moment Mitch had walked into the dining room and everything had changed. She remembered him saying that she made tarnished things shine, not realizing he had done the same for her. She had been tarnished by loss and fear, and he had polished her with his patience and love until she could shine again. One evening, when she and Mitch had been married nearly 10 years, she found him sitting on the porch of their house, which they had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. He was watching the sunset, and she settled beside him, taking his hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just remembering," Mitch said. "I passed through Fort Worth today on my way back from checking the South Herd, rode past the Grand Western Hotel. Did you stop in?" "No, but I thought about it. Thought about that morning when I walked in looking for a room and found you instead. Best wrong turn I ever took." "It was not a wrong turn. It was exactly the right one." Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder. "I have been thinking, too, about everything that brought us to this moment, all the choices we made, the risks we took. It is remarkable, really, how one decision can change everything." "You changed everything for me," Mitch said quietly. "I was just drifting, Adelaide. No purpose, no direction. And then there you were, and suddenly I had a reason to stop running. A reason to become the man I always hoped I could be. You always were that man. I just gave you a reason to believe it." Mitch turned to look at her, his gray eyes, still storm cloud beautiful after all these years, full of the love that had never wavered. "Do you remember what I said to you that day by the river when I asked you to marry me? You said a lot of things that day." "I said I wanted you to polish my rough ways and stay forever." He smiled. "Well, you have done a pretty good job on the rough ways part. And as for the forever part, we are well on our way." "We are," Adelaide agreed. "Though I would say we polished each other. I was pretty rough around the edges too when we met." "You were perfect," Mitch said firmly, "but I will grant that we have both grown. Become better versions of ourselves because we chose each other." From inside the house came the sound of their children, Matthew calling for his father to help him with something. Anne-Marie and Joseph engaged in some sibling squabble. Their life together, messy and beautiful and real. "We should go in," Adelaide said, but neither of them moved immediately. "In a minute," Mitch said. "I just want to sit here with you a moment longer, remember where we started and appreciate where we are." So they sat together as the sun slipped below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge. Two people who had taken a chance on love when it would have been easier not to, who had built a life from that single leap of faith. The girl who polished silver was gone, transformed into someone stronger and more complete. And the cowboy who had asked her to polish his rough ways had become a man who ran a successful ranch, raised 3 remarkable children, and loved his wife with a depth that had only grown over the years. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Mitch pulled Adelaide into his arms in their bedroom. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For saying yes that day by the river. For taking a chance on a rough cowboy who did not have much to offer except his heart. For building this life with me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, for making every day better than the last. "I should be thanking you," Adelaide said. "You gave me everything I thought I had lost. A home, a family, a future. You made me believe in possibility again." "Then we are even." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. And afterward, as Adelaide lay in Mitch's arms listening to his steady heartbeat, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a hotel dining room in Fort Worth to this bedroom in their ranch house, from strangers to lovers to partners in every sense of the word. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of family life. Matthew grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning the business with careful attention and innovative ideas that helped them prosper. Anne-Marie proved to have her mother's skill with a needle and her father's head for business, starting a successful dressmaking shop in Fort Worth by the time she was 18. Joseph, the wild child of the family, talked constantly of seeing the world beyond Texas, of adventures waiting beyond the horizon. "Let him go," Adelaide told Mitch when Joseph announced his intention to travel west at 20 years old. "He needs to find his own way, just like you did." "But I wasted so many years drifting before I found my purpose," Mitch protested. "You did not waste anything. Those years made you who you are. They brought you to Fort Worth and to me. Joseph will find his way too in his own time." So they let Joseph go with their blessing and a promise that he would always have a home to return to. And he did return, 2 years later, with a wife from California and stories about the ocean that kept his siblings enthralled for months. Adelaide and Mitch grew older together, their hair silvering, their faces weathering under the Texas sun. But the love between them never weathered. If anything, it deepened, taking on the patina of years and shared experiences, polished smooth by daily choosing each other again and again. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Mitch took Adelaide back to Fort Worth, to the spot by the Trinity River where he had first told her he loved her. They stood hand in hand, watching the water flow past, just as it had all those years ago. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not walked into that dining room?" Mitch asked. "Sometimes," Adelaide admitted. "I think I would have survived. I am stronger than I knew back then, but I would not have thrived, not like this." "You gave me the space to become fully myself, Mitch, to be more than I ever imagined I could be. You did the same for me, made me believe I could be more than a drifting cowboy with no place to call home." He pulled a small package from his pocket. "I got you something." Adelaide unwrapped the paper to find a silver picture frame, beautifully crafted and polished to a high shine. Inside was a photograph taken on their wedding day, the two of them young and hopeful and standing on the threshold of everything that was to come. "To remember where we started," Mitch said, "and to celebrate everything we built from that beginning. It is beautiful. Thank you." Adelaide traced her fingers over the silver, feeling the cool smoothness. "You know, I still think about that silver I used to polish at the hotel. How tarnished it was, how much work it took to make it shine. I did not realize then that I was polishing more than just spoons and forks. I was polishing myself, preparing for something better even when I could not see what that better thing might be. And then I came along and asked you to polish me too. And I did. We polished each other, really, made each other shine brighter than we ever could have alone." Adelaide smiled. "That is what love does, I think. It brings out the best in us if we let it." They stood there as the sun set, just as they had 25 years before, and Adelaide felt a profound gratitude for the life they had built together. For the risks they had taken, the challenges they had overcome, and the love that had sustained them through it all. 3 more years passed, bringing new grandchildren and new adventures. Matthew married a rancher's daughter and took over more of the day-to-day operations, allowing Mitch to ease into a slower pace. Anne-Marie expanded her business to include a second location. Joseph and his wife settled back in Texas, buying a small ranch of their own where he could apply all the ideas he had gathered in his travels. Adelaide continued sewing, though now it was mostly quilts for grandchildren and alterations for neighbors. She and Mitch spent their evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other so completely that words were sometimes unnecessary. One evening, as they sat watching another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Mitch turned to Adelaide and said, "You know, I think I am the luckiest man who ever lived." That is quite a claim. But true. I got to spend my life with you. Got to watch our children grow into remarkable adults. Got to build something meaningful that will outlast us. Not many people can say that, Adelaide. We built it together, Adelaide reminded him. Neither of us could have done this alone. I know. That is what makes me lucky. That you chose to do it with me. Adelaide took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that remained despite the years. I would choose you again, Mitch Garrett. Every single time, in every possible version of our lives, I would choose you. That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. Then I should say romantic things more often. Mitch laughed, pulling her close. Say them or do not say them. I know how you feel. I have known it from the day you agreed to marry me, from every day after when you woke up and chose to stay. That is the real romance, Adelaide. Not the grand gestures or the pretty words, but the daily choice to love each other even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had started with nothing but hope and built an empire of love and family and purpose. The cowboy who had asked her to polish his rough ways was still rough in some places, but those edges were what made him real, what made him Mitch. And Adelaide, the girl who had once polished silver at a hotel, had learned that the most important things in life could not be polished to perfection. They could only be accepted, celebrated, and cherished in all their flawed glory. As they finally rose to go inside, Adelaide paused at the door and looked back at the prairie stretching endless under the starlight. This land that had seemed so foreign when she first arrived in Texas had become her home in the truest sense. Not because of the house or the ranch or any material thing, but because it was where Mitch was, where their family had grown, where love had taken root and flourished against all odds. "What are you thinking?" Mitch asked, following her gaze. "That I am grateful for all of it. The good and the difficult, the easy days and the hard ones, because it all brought us here to this moment, to this life we share. I am grateful too." Mitch wrapped his arm around her waist, and they stood together in the doorway. "For finding you when I did. For having the courage to ask you to take a chance on me. For every single day we have had together." They went inside then, to the home they had made and the life they had built, and Adelaide thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How a young woman polishing silver in a hotel dining room could meet a cowboy looking for a room and, from that simple encounter, build something eternal. How love could take two broken, searching people and make them whole. How the roughest beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. Years later, when Adelaide was in her 70s and Mitch just past that milestone, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch house, expanded multiple times over the decades, was filled to bursting with family, and the sound of laughter and conversation created a warm cocoon of belonging. Matthew, now running the ranch with his own sons, stood to make a toast. "To my parents, who taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. Who showed us that a life well lived is one spent in service to each other and to family. Who built all of this from nothing but determination and devotion." Anne-Marie added her own toast, her voice thick with emotion. "To the two people who showed me what real partnership looks like. Who never gave up on each other, even when times were hard. Who made us believe that true love exists because we got to watch it every day growing up." Joseph, always the most eloquent of their children, spoke last. "To Mom and Dad, who met by chance and stayed together by choice. whose love story is better than any novel, whose commitment is more inspiring than any sermon. Thank you for being our foundation, our example, and our greatest teachers." Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face as she looked around the room at all these people who existed because she had said yes to a cowboy's proposal by a river 28 years ago. All these lives, all this love, branching out from that single moment of faith. Mitch squeezed her hand, and when she looked at him, she saw that he was crying too. They had built this together, this legacy of love and family and purpose. And it was more than either of them had dreamed possible that first morning in the hotel dining room. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Adelaide and Mitch sat alone on the porch one last time. 50 years, Adelaide marveled. Half a century. Feels like 5 years, feels like 5 minutes, feels like forever. Mitch's voice was rough with age now, but still strong. "I meant what I said that day by the river, Adelaide. Polish my rough ways and stay forever. You did the first part better than I deserved, and you have definitely done the second. But forever is not long enough. I would take 1,000 lifetimes with you if I could." "One lifetime is enough," Adelaide said gently. "As long as we fill it with love and meaning, and we have, Mitch, we really have. No regrets, not a single one. Everything we have been through, even the hard times, made us who we are, made this family what it is. I would not change any of it." "Me neither." Mitch pulled her close and they sat together under the Texas stars, just as they had done countless times over the past 50 years. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me. Thank you for seeing me," Adelaide replied. "For looking past the girl polishing silver and seeing the woman I could become. For loving me through all the changes and challenges. For staying. Always," Mitch promised. "Forever." And he kept that promise. They both did, through all the remaining years they had together, choosing each other every day just as they had from the beginning. When Mitch passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78, Adelaide grieved the loss of her partner but celebrated the life they had shared. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, telling stories about the cowboy who had walked into a hotel dining room and changed her entire life. On her own final day, lying in the bed she had shared with Mitch for so many years, Adelaide looked at the silver picture frame he had given her on their 25th anniversary. The photo had faded with time, but she could still see the young couple they had been, full of hope and love and determination to build something lasting. And they had. The ranch still prospered under Matthew's management. Anne-Marie's business had grown into a successful enterprise. Joseph's children were carrying on the family traditions in their own unique ways. Dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried the legacy of the love she and Mitch had built. As Adelaide closed her eyes for the last time, she thought she could hear Mitch's voice, rough and warm, calling her home. She thought she could feel his hand taking hers, just as he had that first evening by the river. And she smiled, knowing that forever had not ended after all. It had simply changed forms, moving from the physical to the eternal, but remaining as real and true as it had always been. The story of the girl who polished silver and the cowboy who asked her to stay forever became a legend in the family, passed down through generations. Young couples starting out would hear it and be inspired to take chances on love. Parents would tell it to their children as an example of what commitment and devotion looked like. And always, always, the message was the same. Love requires courage. It requires choosing each other, again and again, through all the seasons of life. It requires faith that rough ways can be polished smooth, that two broken people can make each other whole, that the smallest moment can change everything if you are brave enough to let it. Adelaide and Mitch had been brave. They had taken a chance on a connection that made no practical sense, and from that leap of faith had built a life of profound meaning and joy. They had shown everyone who knew them that true love was not a fairy tale but a daily practice, a choice made in the mundane moments as much as the monumental ones. And in the end, that was their real legacy. Not the ranch or the businesses or the material wealth, though those were significant. But the example they set, the standard they established, the proof they provided that love could endure, could thrive, could transform ordinary lives into something extraordinary. Years after both Adelaide and Mitch had passed, their great-great-granddaughter found herself in Fort Worth, walking past the building that had once been the Grand Western Hotel. It had been converted into a museum now, preserving the history of Fort Worth in the late 1800s. On impulse, she went inside and found an exhibit about daily life in the hotel, including photographs of the staff. And there, in a faded photograph dated 1882, was a young woman polishing silver at a long wooden table. The caption identified her as Adelaide Lancaster, chambermaid. But her descendant knew the real story, the one that had been passed down through 5 generations. She knew about the cowboy who had walked through that door and the love story that had followed. She knew about the ranch and the family and the 50 years of choosing each other. Standing in that museum, looking at the photograph of her great-great-grandmother as a young woman on the cusp of everything that was to come, she felt a connection across the decades. Adelaide had been just 23 in that photo, alone and uncertain. But she had been brave when it mattered most, and that bravery had echoed down through the generations, creating ripples of love and family that continued still. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the photograph, then sent it to her family with the message, "Found where it all started." The responses came quickly. Heart emojis and exclamations of wonder and comments about how young Adelaide looked and how amazing it was to see this piece of their history. And then, from her grandmother, Matthew and Anne Marie's daughter, came a longer message. "Your great-great-grandmother taught me that love is the bravest thing we ever do. Not because it guarantees happiness, but because it requires us to be vulnerable, to trust, to hope even when we have every reason not to." She and great-great-grandpa Mitch showed all of us what real partnership looks like. I hope you find that kind of love someday, sweetheart. The kind that polishes your rough edges and makes you shine. The kind that lasts forever, not because it is perfect, but because you choose it every single day. The young woman stood in the museum, reading those words, and felt the weight of her family's history settle around her shoulders like a blessing. This was her heritage, not just the ranch or the family name or the material legacy, but this understanding of what love could be when 2 people were brave enough to reach for it and strong enough to hold on. She thought about Adelaide polishing silver in this very building, not knowing that a dusty cowboy was about to walk through the door and change her life forever. She thought about Mitch asking Adelaide to polish his rough ways and stay forever, and Adelaide saying yes despite every logical reason to refuse. She thought about 50 years of marriage, of children and grandchildren, of hard times and good times and the daily choice to love each other through all of it. And she understood then what her ancestors had known. That the best things in life come not from careful planning or practical thinking, but from being brave enough to take a chance when the moment presents itself. From being willing to polish the rough edges, both your own and your partner's. From choosing forever, not just in the grand romantic gestures, but in the quiet dailiness of life shared. The girl who polished silver had become a legend, but she had started as simply a young woman working an honest job and hoping for something better. The cowboy who asked her to stay forever had been just a drifter looking for a place to belong. Together, they had built an empire of love that lasted far beyond their mortal years, proving that the most valuable things in life cannot be measured in silver or gold, but only in the hearts that carry the memory forward. And so the story ended where it began, in Fort Worth, Texas, in a building where silver was once polished and a love story started. But it was not really an ending at all, because the love Adelaide and Mitch built continued in their descendants, in the lessons passed down, in the example they set. Their forever had truly been forever, not because they never died, but because what they created together could never die as long as there were people to remember and honor what they had built. In the end, that was the truth of it. Love, real love, the kind that requires courage and commitment and daily choice, that love is eternal. It outlasts the people who create it. It echoes through generations. It changes the world in ways both large and small. And it all begins with two people brave enough to see each other, truly see each other, and say yes to the possibility of forever. Adelaide polished silver at the hotel. The cowboy said to polish his rough ways and stay forever. And she did, creating a legacy that would shine as brightly as any silver ever polished, a testament to the transformative power of love when two people are brave enough to choose it and strong enough to sustain it through all the days of their lives and beyond.